Nearly a third of domestic workers in Malaysia work under forced labour conditions. This is according to a survey of 1,201 migrant domestic workers in Southeast Asia by the International Labour Organization ILO. The findings of this survey have raised serious concerns as the figure in Malaysia is alarmingly high compared to 7% and 4% in Singapore and Thailand respectively. We speak to Olsen of the ILO to discuss the prevalence of forced labour in this sector.
The situation of forced labour among the sample that we surveyed is obviously pretty shocking. To see a finding of 29% of migrant domestic workers in conditions that indicate forced labour is a terrible result, I think, for Malaysia and Malaysian society.
In explaining Malaysia's poor performance, Anna said in countries where governments and employers view domestic workers as risk rather than an essential worker, there could be tighter migration requirements and restrictions on domestic workers' freedoms that can amount to forced labour.
Malaysia has ratified the Forced Labour Convention, which is the ILO's Convention on Forced Labour, which gives a definition of forced labour. And the definition is made up of two parts. Firstly, that the work is involuntary or performed involuntarily. And second, that the work is performed under the threat or a menace of a penalty. So some of the indicators of involuntariness are some of the classic things that you would see if you are locked inside, unable to leave, if you are doing excessive overtime, you can't refuse overtime. These are the kinds of indicators we see of involuntariness. For threat or menace of penalty, the second part of the definition, things like actual or threatened physical violence or sexual violence could be a threat or a menace of penalty. Particularly concerning is being told that you will be deported or being told that you will be, the authorities will be informed about your situation. And these are the kinds of things that we source the sample responding to in our Malaysia survey. Now, both of these things, the involuntariness and the threat of the menace of penalty, need to be together for an indication of forced labour, and that's what we found in 29% of the sample from Malaysia.
To rid forced labour conditions among domestic workers, Anna recommends a government scheme that would allow for random checkups at homes to see how the workers are doing.
But first of all, to devise a government scheme aimed at detecting abuse, including forced labour, and ensuring that this scheme includes random house checks or domestic worker interviews. So part of the problem that we often have with domestic work is that there's nobody checking on the conditions of work within private homes. So one of the things that we think we could do is to start to consider how best to reach these workers and make sure that they're okay. Day off legislation, ensuring that migrant domestic workers and all domestic workers have the ability to take one 24-hour consecutive period day off each week, as is provided in the ILO's Convention on Domestic Work. But just that ability to go outside, to be able to potentially talk to your friends, to reach the authorities if you are in a situation of exploitation or abuse, is absolutely critical in bringing these kinds of numbers down.
Countries that are involved in the use of forced labour are also risking their reputation in the international community, said Anna.
The risks, or the immediate risks, are related to the reputation of Malaysia and its international standing. I don't think any country wants to be considered a place where human rights abuses like forced labour are tolerated and accepted by the society. So that reputational risk, while it is sometimes downplayed, I think it's actually extremely important to the character of the nation and to the self-esteem of the country within an international context. The other side of this, of course, is that where we see economies that have significant rates of forced labour, we don't see positive economic development, not inclusive economic development, not sustainable economic development. And of course, that's what everybody wants for their own country. And of course, that's absolutely what we want for Malaysia as well.